The Chevrolet Camaro is one of America's most iconic cars. It debuted actually a year and a day before the day I was born. September the 29th, 1966 is when the first generation Camaro was introduced. Everybody at the time was jumping onto this pony car wagon, and GM was no exception. It followed the success of Ford with its 1964.5 Mustang. These cars became more and more powerful, and the term muscle car was born. Then during the course of the 1970s, the fuel crisis put pay to a lot of these models, and they became sort of bread and butter sort of coupes really, although there were powerful versions as well, but the glory days were gone. And then in the 80s, the likes of the Camaro and the Mustang both became quite watered down. There were high performance versions, but we were into mainly 6 cylinders, and in the case of the Mustang, 4 pots as well. In 2005, Ford debuted a retro looking Mustang, and GM followed suit with the Camaro, the 5th generation Camaro, 4 or 5 years later. I think I'm right in saying that. Now, the 5th generation Camaro in its base guise I thought was absolutely beautiful, but then, you know, like with the Mustang, they started becoming more powerful again, but also more modern looking. So it was a more modern interpretation on a retro look, if that makes sense. And the same happened with the Camaro. This is the 6th generation Camaro, which debuted actually in the middle of 2015 as a 2016 model. I'm Darren, and this is Auto Atlantica. Once this 6th generation debuted, there was a host of models that became available. The mainstream ones had a 335 horsepower V6, and they were in LT trim, known as 1LT, 2LT and 3LT, and then there was an SS model as well, and that came in 1SS and 2SS trims. The higher the number, the more luxurious the car was. Then there was the more bespoke, fire-eating ZL1, which had whereas the SS had a 6.2 litre V8 pumping out 455 horsepower and about the same in pound-feet of torque, the ZL1 used a supercharged version of that engine, developing a massive 650 horsepower. The beauty of this platform is actually a little bit smaller than the 5th generation car. It's about 2.5 inches shorter, it's about an inch narrower, but it's lower. The platform that they used for this car was the Alpha platform, and that was first seen on the Cadillac ATS, which I'll link a review to that I've filmed, and latterly in the CT4 and CT5. The CT5 has similar engines to this as well. In 2019, base model was launched with a 2 litre 4-cylinder turbo, pumping at about 275 horsepower, and that was marketed to compete with Ford's EcoBoost engine that it put in the Mustang. The base model, the LS, was restricted to that engine and a 6-speed Tremec gearbox. But in 2020, they added a car to the lineup, this one, which is the LT1. This has the same 6.2 litre engine as the SS, developing 455 horsepower, but it has the same basic interior as the LT. Now don't confuse 1LT, which is the V6, with LT1, which is this, because it's named after the engine. The supercharged one is the LT4, by the way. What I like about this car, because this is my car, that's why it's dusty and we're standing a good way away from it so it looks clean, is that it has that traditional muscle car recipe of massive power along with few toys to basically give it a lot less weight. So my Camaro is a 2022 model and I've done 140 miles in it. I had a choice of two at the time. One of them was this one with the dark interior and the other had the light interior, and that had the 10-speed Ford GM automatic. Now my stepson Tommy has an LT1 with that automatic gearbox, and we will do a video on that on another occasion. But in terms of living with the car, if I was using it on a daily basis, that is the gearbox to have. It is mapped very differently to the gearbox that's in the Mustang, and it's actually gives you a very civilized driving experience, whereas this 6-speed Tremec, and there was two Tremec 6-speed manuals that were offered in the Camaro. This one is a slightly different set of ratios in the V8 compared to the one that was in the V6. Good God. It's the first warm day of the year and everyone's out in bathing suits. This Tremec gearbox can be a little intimidating at times. It's quite snatchy, and the only thing that I don't really like about it's great if you're just going on a fun run, but I would find it a bit more of a pain to deal with if I was living with it on a daily basis, especially with this electronic parking brake. Now, the parking brake will disengage automatically, and it does have actually have a hill start assist on this gearbox. If you are in a position like I was in a couple of years ago, where I was on a narrow road on a hill with a 90-degree bend, and I was not entirely familiar with it, and I almost smashed the car into a guardrail. I'll put some pictures of that up on the screen. So it takes some, this particular combination does take some getting used to. If the best way to treat it is, it's a manual gearbox which has a bit of automation to it which assists you. That's probably the best way to describe it. So you have a different feel to it compared with a traditional manual setup with a proper handbrake, as I call it. I do not like electronic parking brakes at all. I chose this over a Challenger, which was the other muscle car that I like, simply because of its more diminutive dimensions. And diminutive, of course, is relative. This is still a 75-inch wide car. However, its length at 188 inches is no larger than my Mercury Scorpio. So it actually fits in the garage in my home quite neatly, just as my Scorpio used to. Whereas if I'd have got the Challenger, given its extra length and certainly its extra width, I wouldn't be able to squeeze my cars in my home garage that I can with this. So that's ultimately why the Camaro won out for me. The Camaro as well is, in 6th generation guys, it's never been quite as popular as the Challenger or the Mustang. It's never been as good of a seller, and there's a number of reasons for that. The first one probably relates to what I was talking about with living with this car with the manual gearbox. Coupled with that, you have a very limited field of view in this car. In many respects, it's like driving a letterbox. The rear visibility is particularly poor. Now, it does help that this car has got haunches at the back, and that I find is quite handy when I'm reversing and parking up. The interior room isn't great either, considering the size of the car. This car has long been criticised because of those things. Now, personally, I don't find it an issue, mainly because this is basically in my collection. It's not a daily driver, but also it's a sports car, not a station wagon. So I don't expect it to have acres of room inside to get the family in. I don't expect it to have copious proportions to carry a piano. It's a sports car at the end of the day, and I think it's a very good looking sports car as well, which is another reason why I bought it. I love the way that it performs. The acceleration on it is out of this world. This car will get to 60 in about 4.1 seconds. It's about 0.1, 0.2 seconds slower to 60 than the automatic is. And that's simply because of how good modern automatics are. The other great thing about this particular car as well, which is one reason why I think it is so understated, is its platform, its chassis. The driving dynamics on this thing are absolutely fantastic. The Alpha platform, as Bob Lutz said, is probably one of the most underrated platforms that GM has ever built. And he's right. This thing is not a traditional muscle car in the way that it handles. It is just beautifully balanced. You can throw it into a bend, and despite it being rear drive, I mean, it just barrels through. I'm just coming up on 147 miles in this thing, actually, in over 2 years. And you're probably wondering, what the hell are you doing only doing that kind of mileage in 2 years? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. Firstly, I've got the best part of 20 cars to deal with. Secondly, much depends on the weather on the weekends during the driving season, and last year was absolutely dreadful. So none of the cars really got to get out much at all. It's the start of the driving season today. The weather is fantastic, and so I've had a number of the cars out. But I tend to sort of put them through a 10, 15, 20 mile circuit when I get these cars out at a time, and so I like to drive 2 or 3 in the course of an afternoon before I put them away again. This one is absolutely filthy after the dust from the winter, so we've got to have a good cleaning session as well, which we do once or twice a year. But the other reason that this one is particularly low miles, rather like my Abarth, is because I really want to put paint protection film on it before I take it on any great adventures, and I do plan on taking it on great adventures. But this is what I like about this car. It is so well balanced, and the acceleration is fantastic, and this Tremec gearbox really is quite superb. In every gear you have bags of torque. It's a 6-speed box. This one also has the dual mode exhaust as well. The dual mode exhausts were easily identified by having 4 exhaust ports at the back as opposed to 2, and so when you put it into sport mode you get all those crackles and bangs and pops. It's a lot of fun. So on this particular car, that dual mode exhaust was an option. The only other option that I have on this car are the wheels. The standard alloys were like a dogleg alloy. They're a 20-inch, I believe. And then this design was an option. But then to have this satin finish was a $2,800 option. I don't know why. Answers on a postcard to Auto Atlantica. And that's really it. The red flashes on the front fenders were a dealer fit option, and they go rather nicely with the red 4-pot Brembo brakes that this car's got on it. Now the big difference between the LT1 and the SS, very nice Pontiac Fiero there. The biggest differences are the brakes, but more importantly the cooling. This has an oil cooler on it, but the SS also gets separate transmission and differential coolers as well, whereas this doesn't. Otherwise, mechanically, it's practically the same. It's almost identical. And you can get a 1LE package. This is where things get even more complicated with the Camaro range, which basically gives you wider rear tyres, an Alcantara steering wheel, and you get a satin grey wrap on the hood, and a couple of other things as well. The Camaro is no longer built. It ceased production at the end of 2023, so 2024 model year is the final year. And that's the other reason I bought this car, because I wanted a traditional pushrod engine V8 rear-wheel drive muscle car setup before they went out of production. I do like the interior of the Camaro here. The steering wheel is so superb. It's got a flat bottom, a nice Camaro logo right in the middle there, and this being a manual, it has rev matching, which I've never really used, but I'm going to do a separate video on the rev matching feature. A lot of generic GM switchgear in this, and like I said, it pretty much is the basic car. So you've got a basic sort of like GM dashboard setup here, and it does have a rather nice touch screen. It's a 7-inch. You can get an optional 8-inch on a tech package, and to be perfectly honest with you, why, when you've got this fantastic exhaust note, why would you want a radio in it at all? I really never listen to it, although I do have Sirius XM in this car. It's sort of a nod to the old sort of like 60s pony cars, are these beautiful dial like ventilation vents. This is basically, unlike the SS, which gets a dual zone, this is a single zone climate control, but you basically twist these, one for the temperature and then one for the fan as well. It's simple but really effective, and it's just a nice sort of retro homage. So and that's basically it. You can turn off the traction control here if you are brave, and then you've got various modes here for different driving styles, and there's the infernal electronic handbrake. That's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed this first drive of the 2024 driving season in my 2022 Chevrolet Camaro LT1. I'm Darren, and this is Auto Atlantica.